Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Research to Reality, Test Automation as a Key Enabler for High-Performing Teams with Angie Jones and Nicole Forsgren. I'm sure you are familiar with our expert speakers, so I'll keep this intro brief. As Senior Developer Advocate at Apply Tools, Angie Jones specializes in test automation strategies and techniques. A pillar of the global test automation community, Angie is a world-renowned speaker and thought leader, and you can often find her presenting and teaching at international software conferences. She's also the driving force and director of Test Automation University, a free online educational platform providing test automation courses by leading instructors. Dr. Nicole Forsgren does research and strategy at Google Cloud following the acquisition of her startup by Google. She has been an entrepreneur, professor, sysadmin, and performance engineer. Nicole earned her PhD in Management Information Systems from the University of Arizona and is a research affiliate at Clemson University and Florida International University. So without any further ado, Angie and Nicole, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Adi. Hello, everyone. Welcome, Nicole. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, thanks so much for joining. I'm a huge fan of your work, as you know. So
Well,
let's
and I'm a
jump in.
huge fan of yours.
Thanks so much. Thank you. The book, Accelerate, that you co-authored with Jez Humble and Jean Kim. This book has become a must-read for the tech community. And then for the past 2 years, you've blessed us with the State of DevOps reports, which contain a wealth of information about how the elite DevOps teams are doing things. So I actually organized a conference last week called Test Bash, and it's primarily attended by testers. And several of the speakers there cited Accelerate as well as the State of DevOps report. So this work is really resonating with people because you all have provided us with the data. So thank you and your team so much for this.
Oh, thank you. And I'm so glad to hear that, right? Because sometimes people are like, oh, well, this isn't for me, right? It's only for executives, or it's only for developers, or it's only for fill in the blank, right? But we really did reach out to so many people. As you know, by the way, I definitely want to give you a shout out. You were one of our subject matter experts for the 2019 report, specifically for the subject of testing, because it's such an essential part of this software development and delivery process. And so I was super excited you back channeled me and you were like, the work is getting a shout out, because we can't make software well if we're skipping testing, or if we do, everything's going to break in really, really epic ways.
Exactly. And it's really funny that you say that, because many other articles and blog posts on DevOps, they've done what a lot of the predecessor processes have done in the past, which is neglect to consider how testing fits into the overall picture. And I think that this is yet another reason why your research resonates so well with the testing community, because you have noticed that good test automation is a key enabler for these high performing teams. So I read all of your work and I'm just like nodding and yep, true. But I'll admit, Nicole, this is not what I'm seeing in the trenches. I travel the globe, I consult with teams varying from like small startups to the massive top tech companies of the world, right? And many of these
Mhm.
teams are not yet elite, but they do want to get there. So that's what I love for us to discuss today. If that's okay with you, I'd like to jump into some of the key points of your research on the high performing teams, compare that to what I'm seeing in the trenches, and discuss how these teams can close that gap. Sound good?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
All right. So, in this year's State of DevOps report, you listed automated testing as a basic foundation for teams. Yet, so many teams, they don't get around to this until they feel they have matured. So there's a belief that They just need to focus on building the thing right now. And after that thing is built, then they can add the nice to haves like tests. So, what does it mean to have automated tests? And how can teams get started with this earlier?
It's so fascinating you say this, right? Because when we were writing up the report and we say this is a good foundation, I want to say it's a foundation because it's almost like good basic scaffolding that you can get started on early, right? Like version control. It's one of these things that you can do early and you don't need to have grand architectural considerations, right? So it gives you good tests, give you really nice signal like pass fail.
Hmm.
It's really relatively easy for devs to recreate test failures. Um, you can also do TDD. Um, we need to have pretty good test data. And that doesn't just mean taking a full copy of our production database, right? We also want to make sure that we have relatively fast tests. So we want to have them run in 10 minutes or less, which also means that we want to have really good unit tests. So some of our tests should be running early in the process because we want to have that fast feedback loop, right? So
Right.
sometimes I'll talk to developers and they'll say, well, I want to skip tests because I only want to run them at the end of the day or once a week. And like my face does this contortion. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, well, it takes like 9 hours to run in batch overnight. And I'm like, okay, something is wrong, right? We want to run these small incremental tests that give us, again, this good, fast signal,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And and I kind of said this and ran past it. We want to do things like TDD, right? Test-driven development. And sometimes people are like, well, but what do you mean, right? Like I'm a developer, I'm not a tester. But the thing is, if we write our code with testability in mind,
Mm.
it makes our code more testable,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
makes everything just work better all the way downstream so that when our testers when the code gets to our testers, it is more decomposable, it is more testable, it's like better suited for all of these things that we need to be thinking about, right? And so is this resonating with what you've seen?
Yeah, people seem to know, they know that this is something they should be doing, right? The problem is like how do I get there? So a lot of developers that I talk with, they will admit like, hey, I don't know anything about testing. Like I know I should be doing it, but when we think about how developers are trained, testing is not usually a part of the curriculum. Like I didn't learn
Oh,
testing when I was
that
studying computer
that's a
science, you know what I
brilliant
mean?
point. When I was in university, we didn't do TDD at all.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't do this. And TDD specifically is painful if you if you're not used to testing, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
you first start, it's like, oh, I start with the test and then I develop the code. Whereas, you're dying, you're itching to get to this feature. But now you have to write the test first, and then it's not working and you make it work, and people struggle with that when they first get started, and they usually tell me that it seems like a waste of time to even go down that approach, right?
I mean,
But
that's such a good point.
I do get like, so I'm not like yay pro TDD or anti TDD. Like I think that TDD serves a very valid purpose and should be used like when appropriate, right?
It's
But
I mean
sometimes,
it's not a single fix. Like it is a
yeah.
tool in a toolbox.
Exactly, exactly. And some testing, like I just want people to test their stuff. I don't care if they do it before, I don't care if they do it after, but I would just ideally like people to test their stuff. And if you can test it within the same sprint that you're delivering the feature, that would make That would make a big deal. That would make a big difference. Um, and
Well, and I think another interesting point here, I will occasionally uh, argue for TDD again because it has the
please.
effect of making code more testable and, like you said, kind of delivering it in the same sprint. And then sometimes people will look at me and they will say, "Oh, does this mean that you don't think testers are important?" I will say not
Mm,
at all, because all this is doing is hopefully discovering errors earlier in the process and, making code more testable
mm-hmm,
so that we can then free up our test experts to
mm-hmm.
discover other additional problems later, right?
Right.
To do more test automation and
Exactly.
deliver more additional value later in the process, right? I'm not like, we will never remove these experts from what we're doing. It's,
Right.
sometimes people are like, are we going to be automating people out of jobs? I'm like, are you kidding? Whoever uses software, software will forever find ways to break for us.
Forever. Forever. You're right. Yes. Yeah, so I want people to test their stuff, test it early, test it before you give it to the testers. Because there's nothing that's more annoying in a suck of time than someone testing your stuff in the most basic of scenarios don't work. You know what I mean? So, um, like you said, small tests, go for those. You have hopefully experts on your team who specialize in testing, who can do like the more elaborate testing. But if you can just put in like those basic unit tests, I think that that would be a great giant step forward. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So let's see. We have in the report also you talk about tasks that are better executed at the organization level and some that are better executed at the team level. And of those tasks, you find that continuous integration and automated testing are a few that are better done at the team level. And when all the teams are doing this concurrently, it can be a great force multiplier across the organization. Now, the teams that I work with, they're definitely doing this at the team level. However, I'm not sure many have realized the benefits gained at the organization level. So, do all teams need to be on board? And how does this bubble up, Nicole, to the organization level benefits?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up. And what we're doing in this part of the report is suggesting that there are some things that teams could just kind of get started with on their own. And things like automated testing is one of those things, right? Like, as a tester, if you're working within a team or within a group, you can kind of get started, right? Things like a change approval process or a system re-architecture, you kind of need
Mm.
organizational level span of control to really make real change, right? Like, it just requires a certain level of coordination or bureaucratic support to make changes at that level. I will absolutely agree with you, though, that if you are doing like significant testing or testing for functions and features that span several teams,
Mhm.
or for types of features where you can coordinate across teams, um, you can absolutely gain a lot of benefits, right, by kind of coordinating
Mm.
and collaborating. But some
Mhm.
types of things you can at least kind of get started. Things like automated tests, things like use of version control, those can help, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so what I hear you saying is you don't have to go and get like all of this approval and form all of this process around testing to get started. Like just get started at your team level, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's totally true. Like this is as simple as maybe a meeting, like just to discuss, okay, why are we automating our tests? Like, what purpose are we trying to serve? Make sure everyone's aligned with what that is. Like, okay, we want to be able to deploy ever so often, right? So, oh, once a day or something like that. And to do that, we need to have some reliable feedback and make sure we're not breaking stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, okay, that's our goal, right? And so from there, that kind of informs the rest of your decisions on which tests do we automate. Like, do these gate the deployments? And then you get into the discussions of, I guess, which tools and things you're going to use and stuff like that. But yeah, all of that can be contained within an individual team. Now, I've worked in companies where they might try to spread a testing strategy across like an organization. I'll be honest, that it just felt heavier, it felt it felt like
Right.
a bigger thing than it was. Then you have all of this debate going back and forth. Well, we don't want to use this, we want to use that, and yada yada yada, whatever. So yeah, I'm
And you
with
kind
you
of
here.
lose a lot of the speed and agility when you have to coordinate at that level, right? The nice thing about focusing at the team level, or maybe a couple teams that are really uh, working and collaborating closely, you can move fast. You can make
Yeah.
fast decisions around the frameworks or the principles and the priorities. You can get a lot of stuff done.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I worked with one team once, and they were like, they were trying to do this whole organization thing, and they got a little fed up because they desperately wanted to just get started. So they just did it. They just got started, they made the decisions amongst themselves and got started. And then they presented their success to the overall organization and say, hey, this is how we got started. This is what we've used. This is what we're seeing. Now we're able to move so much faster. Here's the feedback we get. We're in love with our process. And then other teams in the organization were like, oh, wow, thank you. So you've laid out the blueprint for us and we can adopt to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, see, I love that. I
Yeah.
love that approach.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, great. So, last year's report found that test automation had a significant impact on continuous delivery, but you didn't necessarily consider the relationship between these two. But this year you did. And you found that the automated tests positively impact continuous integration by making it better. So many of the teams that I've worked with, they've tried to incorporate automated tests as part of their CI, but anything beyond basic unit tests cause quite a headache for them. So I tend to hear teams say that integration tests slow down their CI, the tests take too long to run, they're brittle, and so on. So as opposed to running them on every build, the teams are doing things like running them maybe once a day, right? So if they fail, their thought process here is, well, we have a list of check-ins for that day, better than like that week or that month, and they
Mhm.
triage it this way. So Nicole, do you see any drawbacks to this approach, and how might people change what they're currently doing to enable faster feedback?
So it, it can be tricky, right? Because it kind of depends on what your test system looks like, what your build system looks like. Because if you have a whole bunch of tests and in your build system kind of tightly coupled, like I had kind of joked before, where if you're just waiting for like a 9-hour build, that can
Yeah.
be really, really difficult. But if you have a way to run smaller tests so you get fast feedback, um, that that can be nice, right? Um, but they need to be designed for a CI system,
Mm-hmm.
and it can also help if you have things designed so that you don't have like significant branching problems, right? So that you don't have like branch merge conflicts and things like that happening, right?
Right. I love that you said designed for CI, because that's it. That's the key right there. So CI, this is the big league, right? Um, we're used to, when you first get started, right? Very immature type teams. We're used to coding up the test, and we'll run the test before we check something in, but these tests are running locally, right? So if anything fails, or for some reason other than the code is wrong, like just some flaky failure or something, then you say, oh, let me see what happens. Oh yeah, that's not a real failure, I'm good. And you check your test, you check your code in, and kind of leave the test as it is, right? But if you're going to design these tests to run for CI, then these tests now have a very big responsibility. They're on the big stage now. They're gating the integration or the deployments, and so they need to be designed as such. So I've actually
Oh,
written
see,
about this.
this is such a perfect point. That's
Yeah,
absolutely right.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I've written about this in greater detail on D-Zone's Guide to DevOps. Let me get you all the link here. So this is an ebook, and it's on D-Zone. You can like sign up for this ebook, or like if you go to D-Zone and just search for like testing and CI, you can get the article without getting the book, because I think this is gated or something with a email or something like that. But whatever, however you get it. But in this ebook, I discuss four main factors that should be considered when you're developing automated tests for CI. And those four things, briefly: speed is number one. So you design them to run as quickly as possible. And I go to the article, I'll give you like more detail on how do you do that. Number two is reliability. So eliminate the flakiness of tests by improving the, like you said, Nicole, the test automatability of the application, the testability of that
Yep.
application. Managing the test data, you've also mentioned. Accounting for things like asynchronous action, so timing issues, big cause of test failing, right? Number three is quantity. So don't automate every single thing. Don't
Oh, I
automate
love
for
that you include
automation's
that.
sake.
I love that you include that. People make
Yeah,
that mistake.
a lot of people do, Nicole, because they think that the idea here is to automate our manual tasks, right? And so here are all of our tests that our testers have been running manually. Let's remove those from them and let's automate them all. Well, here's the thing, like when in doing that, you're slowing down your CI build. Even if you run these in parallel, still you're slowing them down, and it's a lot of noise. So if I'm looking for fast feedback, let's say I check in something and there's 50 tests that fail, and I think, what? All I did was make like a one line change here. Why are 50 tests failing? Well, I have to, as the developer, I have to go through all 50 failures to see
Every single
what I
one.
broke. And guess what? All of them are saying the same thing. So why do I need 50 things to tell me that I broke this one thing? Wouldn't one
Yep.
test do that same job? So you have to
And do you know
really
what's,
go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, do you know what's related to this is cleaning up and pruning your tests. If something's
Mm,
not relevant or related anymore, take it out.
listen, Nicole, you are preaching here today, okay? People can barely write the test. So you talk about going back and like going through and actually maintaining them, which is number four on the list. Actually
Oh,
maintaining your
good
test.
segue.
Yeah, and you need to be able to delete them. And I'll be honest, I've been doing automation for a very long time, but this is something that I've just learned in the last maybe 5 years, that it's okay to delete these things. Like maybe this test was very important at the time that it was written, right? But now the data is showing us this is no longer that important. Maybe it's covered by something else. Maybe we thought this was going to be the feature that saved the company, but nobody's using it. So maybe we don't need this. And here's the thing: this is what I tell people: an easy way that you can delete these tests, because to be honest, nobody's gonna, not nobody, but a lot of people are not gonna build in the time to go and look through their tests and see which ones they can delete. But here's an easy way to do that. If at any point you have failures, let's say in your CI, and so this has stopped your integration, and you look at that test and you say, okay, yeah, but we're still going to deploy. Guess what? That test doesn't need to be in there because it's gating your integration and your deployment, and you don't care about that very much. So there's two ways you can handle it. You can delete the test because it seems like it's not that valuable, or if you think, I still want to know this information, I just don't want to stop deployment because of it, move them out to another build. So you can have more than one builds. Have your important tests run as part of your main build, and then you can have like these kind of stepchildren type tests run as once a day or something like that. So you'll still have that information, but it's not part of your CI build.
Okay, that's my favorite pro tip for today.
All right.
That I learn something new every single time I talk to you and work with you. I will say we always talk about technical debt in our code. Just like you pointed out, we have technical debt in our tests as well.
Facts.
So it's perfect.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, what else? So your study showed that the architecture designs that permit testing and deploying services independently help the teams achieve higher performance. And it's really interesting that you found that design considerations should include testing, because people don't usually think of testing until after the feature is developed, which makes automated testing much harder, right? When the product was not designed or developed with test automatability in mind. And you talked about this earlier. There is
Yep.
a test coach, notable test coach out of Ireland. His name is Rob Meany. I've just discovered Rob's work in the last year, and I've been like consuming it like someone who is really eager to learn some more stuff. But he created this model that's called the 10 Peas of Testability. And he says that for a product to be testable, it must be designed to facilitate testing and automation at every level of the product, and that your process should help the team decompose work into small testable chunks. A lot of what you said there, Nicole, as well. Do you find that these early considerations make a significant difference?
Yeah, I mean, it really does help, right? Because as you mentioned, so architecture and having a good architecture that contributes to performance, and the way we define performance is speed and stability, is about having this loosely coupled architecture. And this is communication and coordination among teams so that they can develop, deliver, test. And it's without fine-grained communication and coordination. So that can be provisioning, storage, and compute. It can be provisioning test resources and conducting test. It can be about deploying and doing, release engineering. And it's running and deploying your software throughout this entire process. And so it's important to be able to do it all the way through the process. So it is early considerations. It helps if you do it early. I'm not going to say you don't have to do it early, because we do have to be able to sometimes help transform or migrate or modernize our legacy systems. But if you have somehow, I'm going to say somehow with a lot of grace for people who have skipped, if you skip a piece of that process, if you think about provisioning, storage, and compute, like getting a dev environment and getting a release environment, but you've like skipped the whole middle test section, of course you're going to have a constraint. You're going to have something that surprisingly blocks you. Of course you need test. It's a huge piece of what you're doing, or you're just going to be dumping out like delivering trash at the back and suddenly needing to figure out how to fix all of these errors that you've delivered. And we already know there's going to be some errors and some mistakes because we never deliver something perfect. But it's better if we deliver a few mistakes and a few errors, a very small change fail rate that we can fix quickly and fix easily, instead of like a 90% fail rate that, you know, just like collapses everything, right?
Yeah. And you know what else? People often view testing as the bottleneck to actually
Well,
getting the feature out the door. And
because if
well,
you do it wrong, of course it is.
exactly. Exactly.
People doing
So
it wrong.
if you don't build that testability in, then testing is going to be more difficult. Yes, of course, it has become this bottleneck, but that's not due to the fault of the testers, right? That's because this application was not built to be tested. So people are jumping through hoops and doing all kind of wizardry to be able to test your work, right? And I'm
Right.
mostly talking about at the higher levels of the pyramid. So if I'm thinking about maybe some UI tests or some integration tests, this is where the testability really helps.
Right.
I need to be
I
able
mean,
to test this. As I'm designing this test, I need it to be all the things we said. I want it to be fast and all of this. And for it to be fast, I want to be able to call into what I call code scenes. And these are like maybe some API calls, some business logic. I don't want to do everything from the UI, which means this stuff needs to be available to me. It needs to be something that has been considered when developing this feature. Like, how are we going to test this? And this kind of comes back to the TDD, as you mentioned earlier. If we are practicing TDD, right, then testability is at the forefront of your thoughts when developing the feature.
yes. I mean, this is such a cliche, but it's true, right? We need to build quality in. And if we aren't building quality in, which testing is a core component of that, then we could almost change our perspective and say, instead of testing be our core, the testing is our constraint that takes the most time. Honestly, development is our core constraint. That's what's taking the most time. What are y'all doing? Right?
Yeah, this is
That's
true.
not what's delivering value. The thing that's delivering value and building in quality is testing. That really is what's delivering the most value and
Mm-hmm.
removing the most errors.
Yeah.
Developers are, I mean, I love y'all. Developers are adding errors. Testers are removing errors. Let's just shift our perspective. Help us
Somebody
help
tweet
you.
that out. Somebody tweet that quote. That was a tweetable quote.
OH.
All right. Let's move on before we get Nicole in some trouble here. Okay.
I
So,
know. I've had 2 Diet Cokes. This is what happens, y'all.
all right. So the research concludes that automation is truly a sound investment as it allows engineers to spend less time on manual work and instead they can focus on the new work. Yet, what I'm hearing from practitioners is listen, the time is only allocated for feature development. We don't have the time, Angie. We don't have the budget, Angie, to automate because it's not considered a feature. Nicole, how do we get buy-in for time?
I I hear this constantly, right? Because this is what it's capital planning time, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what is easier to justify. We can always justify features. We can always justify shipping something. This is what we can put in our perf packets. This is what we can put in our promo packets. I have to say though, again, automated testing and testing activities, by the way, for anyone, we've been loving on automated testing. For anyone out there who does QA, we love you too, because
Yes.
that is the hard work and the interesting work and the novel work and the stuff that we cannot automate, or the stuff that you have to figure it out first manually and then we can automate it.
Exactly.
But anything that is testing and QA and all of these other things, that's what helps us find these like crazy, weird site conditions. And there's this fantastic case that I use all the time, the HP LaserJet firmware case. So Gary Groover and his team needed to find a way to help improve the quality at HP LaserJet. And it's on firmware. So for people who say, well, I can't do automated testing, it's too hard. Well, y'all are probably working on software. So if they could do it on firmware, excuse number one's out the door. But they talk about this transformation. And their biggest problem was they had so many constraints. They were only spending 5% of their development time writing new features, because they were working on printers and they had to write so many different versions of code. They were spending like 15 to 20% of their time integrating their code back into trunk because they were working on so many branches. Like it would take them, when they checked in code, it would take them a week to figure out if it actually integrated successfully. So they just started chipping away at the problem. They had two goals in mind, just get off the critical path, and they wanted to have 10x their time of capacity to innovate. After a couple of years, their capacity for innovation went from 5% to 40%.
Wow. And
when you look down through all of their time, you suddenly realize they now have, I want to say 40% of their time just for automated testing, because they had seen so much benefit in automated tests. Why? Because they were building in so much quality. Because originally they were spending 25% of their time on product support. And it's interesting because when you think about what product support is, that's customer problems. Those are problems that are making it all the way to the field. And it just dropped drastically.
Wow. That's great. That's powerful. I'm glad that you shared that story, because a lot of teams fail at this. And so you hear mumbles throughout the hallways of companies, of Twitter, of conferences, where people who have been burned by attempting to do automation, they're saying things like, this automation thing, I don't see the return on investment. So that's why I really value the work that you've done, the stories that you share, what you're seeing out. The research is showing that, there are teams who are able to do this properly. And when they are definitely seeing a return on their investment. So I love that. I love that. Thank you. All right. So this has been extremely insightful, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, I love hearing the stories about what you see, right? Where the research might match up and where you see things a little different. And especially the tips that you shared on how to develop automated tests specifically for CI, because so many more teams and organizations are doing continuous integration more. And if you don't have your automated tests developed the right way, it's hard to pull those two together. Yeah. So I'm gonna go reread your article because I'm super excited. I had somebody this week ask me for tips, so I'm pointing them to that. Thank you.
Point them to that. Yeah. That one goes into more detail too about how to get it done, right? So yeah, definitely send them my way. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been very, very good. Shall we take some questions from the audience? Because people have tweeted me and asked, will we get to talk to you all live? So maybe we should take some questions. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, Adi, do we have any questions?
Yes, of course we do. So first of all, you mentioned TDD and university in the beginning. So we got a question, why do you think universities don't teach students how to write unit and integration tests?
Very good question. Okay, so I believe Nicole has taught at the university, and so have I. I actually taught a programming course like Java at the university level. Here's the thing, there's so much to cover. Like, we all know this as technologists, right? There's just so
Yeah.
much material to cover. So it's hard to fit in. Like, when I taught the Java course, there were several things that I had to cut out of the agenda that I would have loved to teach. And these are things that were, core Java concepts. So testing, which is, not a core Java concept, definitely doesn't make the bill. Here's what I tended to do when I was teaching. So if anybody else is a teacher, you have a teacher in your life, feel free to share this. So what I would do is kind of teach the habit. So I wouldn't teach about testing per se, but I would say, okay, did you test your code? Or I'll have them do like in class exercises. Like, okay, everybody, you have like 15 minutes, and I need you to code this up, and call me when you're done. And I would play tester for them. And I would go over and say, "Oh, are you done?" And then, of course, I would put in some goofy input to break their program, right? And I'll say, "Look, this broke. You're not done." And this kind of mindset, this helped them understand, like, oh, I have to test my code. Like, it's not just good enough to write it. I have to actually test it with like different inputs. And so they got that insight, and I would treat their homework submissions or projects as like code reviews, right? So I would go through and make comments. I would run it with various inputs just so they understood that testing is a part of development. Nicole, you have anything?
I love that answer. My snark answer is that many professors at the university level, if they're tenure track, um, I guess let me reverse that. Very few tenure track professors at the university level have practical experience.
Mm,
And so the combination of the first part of Angie's answer, there is so much to teach, we are barely keeping up, right? And from a lack of a better term, DevOps perspective, we are starting to I understand, the rest of us are trying to help them, the rest of them, them understand that we are drastically under preparing our students for what a full end-to-end experience looks like, right? Like we don't have release engineering. We don't even have great sysadmin / IT ops material. We don't have great distributed systems material. And then when you pair that with professors who have maybe gone straight from undergrad to PhDs,
mm,
they have just taken courses, and then you look at textbooks that have written by professors who have gone straight from undergrad to
yeah,
PhD.
yeah.
They've maybe had one unit on testing from a theoretical standpoint, and so you don't realize the types of problems that you hit and then the types of solutions that you solve by having good testing, especially when you hit a test that hits a distributed system, and the types of cascading failures that a simple test can solve, right?
Mm,
I mean, the best things that I've learned are from stupid but amazingly brilliant cascading failure mistakes that I will never make again, right? Like, I had a year or two at IBM when I was a tester, and I'm like, this is glorious. Like, there are some mistakes I will never make again because they were epic.
yeah.
And until you've earned those stripes, I don't think you grok the importance of that. And
Mm,
then when you have to find a way to cut and like drastically cut material, it's hard to figure out when you're like, testing, like it's fine, they can do it later. But like it's right, like it's
yeah,
tough.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so tough, and you've only got 4 years. And paired with the importance of having a good balanced liberal arts-ish education, because y'all, more of our, I'm sorry, like mini soapbox here, more of our students need to know like how to communicate and how to
Mm-hmm.
write and like read a book on something that's not tech, because
Yeah.
it's just super important, right?
Yep.
And so how do you cram that into 4 years, 3 or 4 years, 5 years? Most students take 5 years to graduate, but even then, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
It's
have a
tough.
well-rounded university experience. There's so much to do.
Yep.
Hard problems. Now, and also that's assuming that they've gone to university. We also have boot camps, and boot camps optimize for getting out as quickly as possible, which is totally understandable given our economic climate and environment. So how do they know what to pick and what not to pick?
Right. Yep. D, any others?
Of course. So if we were on the topic of TDD, another question, is it the responsibility of the developers to maintain the tests that they write going forward, including removing tests as needed?
Is it their responsibility? Um, yes. Like I think the test, just like the code, everything is like communal property, right? This is all of our
Yeah,
responsibility. Yeah, Nicole.
yeah, I think it's everyone's responsible. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, right? It's like it's all of our babies. I think it should be your responsibility, just like your code is. I also think that like we're all kind of family, and in some ways, if a tester sees TDD that is good-ish but can also be improved, that's one of the great benefits of working closely with testers is they can help
Mm,
show devs what good tests look like, and devs can show testers what better automation can look like, and
mm.
operation folks can show developers what scalability actually looks like, right? And developers can show operations folks what performance looks like.
Yes, I
Like
love that you
I
said that. I recommend that developers add your testers and your automation folks to your code reviews, right? Even if they skip
yes,
over the implementation of the code, but let them at least look at the unit test. One, they'll help you find gaps. And then two, this helps serve as input to how they're going to automate the bigger test, right? So if I know that something is already pretty well covered at the unit test level, I don't have to write like this big, humongous test for that. I can say, oh, okay, I had a couple of more ideas, but it'll be better if I put these right here with your unit test. So, yeah, definitely include other people to look at those things. And then when you want to delete somebody's test, back to the original question, um, that's a sticky one, right? Because you don't want people like upset that you deleted there. So people get so married to their code, Nicole. Oh my God. But
oh,
yeah,
I
conclude
know.
them on the code review. Say, hey, whatever reason it was that you were gonna delete this, and make sure like everybody's okay with it or whatever.
Yep.
What else, Adi?
So if we're on the subject of developers, so another question we have is, what do you think about the strategy of some companies that actually have teams where the software engineers are responsible for developing the code as well as testing it end to end without any QA professionals? What are the pros and the cons in your opinion?
I have some
I
strong
mean,
opinions. Nicole, do you want to go first?
I mean, so there's thoughts. Um, if so some pros, if devs are fully responsible for testing, assuming they have some expertise and experience in testing, then in theory, a pro will be that that code will likely be more testable because they will develop with testability in mind. And so you said end to end. So I'm assuming that they are also collaborating more with ops. It will also probably be more scalable and performant. However, if we're not using or leveraging QA at all, and if we don't have someone that is taking a completely external facing role or like wearing a completely different hat, you do tend to lose other perspectives. And QA folk are they just look at the world differently. And I'm not saying like they're built differently, but like their whole job is to look at how things run. Their whole job is to look at how they can break things and how someone else might use the software differently or interact with the software differently. And even if you do a rotation, like spending a few weeks or a few months fundamentally looking at something differently, you just start breaking stuff, which is kind of the point. And so that would be a con.
All right.
Angie, I'm so excited for this.
Okay, so here's my thoughts on this. I believe people have specialties where they are the expert. Yeah. Many, I would even go with most developers that I know, testing is not their expertise, right? So a pro of having them do the whole shebang is that yes, they feel the pain of writing tests, coming up with scenarios. So they'll make their code more testable. That's definitely a pro. And they'll learn some of these skills as well about testing. But the cons, there are far more cons, right? Again, they're not the experts. I go to a lot of conferences, like a lot. I go to testing conferences, I go to development conferences. I often talk about testing. At the testing conferences, you are hard pressed to find a developer there to learn more about testing. And
Oh,
at the
yes. I'm
developer
going to plus one that real
conferences,
quick.
at the developer conferences, if there's a talk on testing, it's empty. People don't want to hear about it. They would rather learn what it is that they care about, right? So there's this whole lack of interest. Testing feels like a chore. So I think that business leaders are naive when they think that their developers are going to be motivated and prepared enough to carry development and testing all the way through, right? And there's just not, we talked about time earlier, there's just not enough time to be able to do all the things. And I really believe that people try to overload these jobs and make you do 2 or 3 jobs all in one for the same paycheck, right? So I think that there is very much so a need for the developers to understand testing, to do their fair share, but I feel like it's unfair and unrealistic to think that they will be able to do all of the testing end to end and that it be done right. They're not studying this space. This is not their area, right? They're not studying it. So it's really easy to miss a lot of things. I wrote an article. This was one of my very first blog posts and it was so controversial, and the title was "Your developers should not lead your automation efforts," right? And I had all of these developers jump on me like, "What? We can do automation, we can do it." And it was funny because you never want to do it, and now you're arguing me that you can do it. Yes, you can do it, and when I make those points, but my main point was this is not their specialty and they're not studying this space to be able to know all of the intricacies about it. So that's why you have experts come in and help guide and lead and coach the developers to be able to contribute to this effort. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. Hello?
Yeah,
No,
another
I think it's
question.
perfect.
Oh, okay.
Next question, Angie.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think this might be our last one.
Well, we'll see how long it takes to answer it. I'll try to pick a good one. Where does exploratory testing fit into a high-performing team's process?
Nicole?
I mean, I think it fits into the same place that any team, the same place as any team's process, except probably lowest performers might not do it because they will be short-sighted. But I mean, Angie, do you have strong opinions and thoughts? I mean, it would fit in the same places as any
Yeah,
other team's process.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a place for it. It's critical. We automate stuff so that we can free up our testers to be able to do this exploratory testing. Like Nicole mentioned,
Exactly.
QA
Exactly.
folks, they have this brilliant mind, right? They're able to think about all of these different scenarios and use cases. A lot of times when I see some of the bugs that come like in the news, like these real big bugs or whatever, it's clear that okay, someone was only thinking about this from like the specific what they call happy path use case,
Yeah.
whereas testers can come up with a lot of different happy paths. Like they are trained and skilled to be able to do this. And I love testers to be involved, not just at the end to do the exploratory testing. Like that's great, but I love them involved very early in the process. I've seen testers come into design meetings and be able to point holes in all the design and the flaws there and be able to essentially find bugs before the code was ever written. They can look at this and
Yes.
say, no, this is not going to work. What you're going to integrate with this third party application, not like that. You aren't. Here are all the problems that are going to fall out from that. And it's like,
Yep.
wow. That's the
Yes.
kind of mind you want in every stage of the development.
At a minimum, I'd love to see them at demos, even like early, barely
Mm,
working demos at a minimum. Because like you
mm,
said, they are so creative. Like their brains just either because they were born that way or they've trained their brains to work in like these ridiculous ways. They spot holes and they spot, like you said, they like carve their own happy paths through interaction and through software that I'm like, this is the coolest thing. Also, never touch my stuff. It is fascinating. It is so great. I'd love to watch them work.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, please touch all of my stuff because I want you to break it before anybody else breaks it.
Right. Right. Great. Okay, Adi, I think we're out of time.
Oh, can I mention one more thing really quickly?
Sure.
One thing I love about exploratory testers, like you were saying, bring them into design and early demos because sometimes they will mention something with their tester brain, like breaking a tester brain, that sometimes I've brought them in early and they will discover ways to break something that will actually open up new paths and new ideas and new models
Mm,
for development and pivot, which people sometimes take for granted because I was joking right now, they will hide it from them because they don't want to break it. Bring them in early and sometimes you can spin off and pivot a new feature or a new function because they will have these new creative, amazing ideas.
yeah. Yeah.
That I just love.
Amazing. Yep.
So related to
Okay.
the other question about like, do you really need QA? Absolutely.
Definitely, 100%. Well, thank you so much, Nicole. This was fun, and
Oh,
hopefully the
thank
audience
you.
got a lot of insight from this. If you have not read Accelerate, What Are You Doing? Definitely make sure to get that book. Someone tweeted out yesterday, a manager, he's like, I buy copies for everybody who joins my team. And I'm like, yes, yes, you are managing correctly, right? If you've not read the State of DevOps reports, I'm serious. There's a wealth of information in there. You see like how the high performing teams are getting things done. Like this stuff is not impossible. It just takes a little bit of effort, right? And so Nicole and her team lays all of this information out. So definitely be sure to check that out. Okay,
And
Nicole,
be
thank
sure
you
to
so
check out
much.
Angie's section in D-Zone.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Be sure to check out that D Zone ebook. There's multiple authors in there, and I have this section on testing and CI. So good information there as well. All right. So we'll let you go. Adi, did you have any closing
Uh,
comments or remarks?
so yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone that joined us today for this live session. And of course, thank you, our expert speakers. And I just wanted to remind everyone that the recording will be sent to you by email by end of day Monday. That's it for me.
All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.